Online education in America, virtual schools versus blended schools. Since the early part of this century, online schools have been seen as an answer to ever-tightening budgets, crowded classrooms, needed innovation in education, personalization of the learning experience, and an alternative to the formal environment of the classroom. They are now available in some way at every level of the learning process, from kindergarten through graduate schools, including continuing education and professional training. A search for current numbers was unfruitful, and the 2011 number is questioned by some, but these disparities justify the call for greater accountability in online education to report enrollments and other academic data in a timely and accurate manner. Comparison of models. This presentation will discuss the implications of each of these, virtual schools and blended learning. The questions to be answered are: how effective are each of these instructional models? What are the consequences of their continued use for the students of America? Full-time virtual schools deliver all curriculum and instruction via the internet and electronic communication, usually asynchronously with students at home and teachers at a remote location. Asynchronously means they are not necessarily online at the same time. The blended classroom. In this model of instruction, there are many different methods of implementation, since it can involve students using online resources before, during, or after face-to-face instructional time in a classroom setting. The types of schools being compared. We have the private schools and public schools. In the public schools, we have the district schools, which are local area public schools, and then we have the charter schools, which are semi-independent local public schools. In the private schools, we have nonprofit, which are usually operated by a church or nonprofit corporation, and for-profit, which are operated by a private individual or corporation as a business. Each year, the National Educational Policy Center evaluates education in America. Much of the information for this project has come from their 2016-2017 reports. From 0 to over 250,000 enrolled students in less than 15 years is impressive growth. But some question if it is deserved. The two dotted lines show for-profit virtual school enrollment levels over the same time period. This report will look at some of the concerns raised by the data collected. Blended learning schools haven't been around as long, nor do they have as many students enrolled. However, the growth rate is still impressive, with growth from 1,000 to 36,000+ in under 5 years. Part of this slower growth rate versus the virtual schools is due to the requirements of costly brick-and-mortar or physical classrooms, with the included staffing and infrastructure requirements. Many of these schools are found in urban areas with lower income students. In 2015-16, 528 full-time virtual schools enrolled 278,511 students, and 140 blended schools enrolled 36,605 students. We will look at the yearly increase. For blended schools, it is more significant. 61% in the number of schools, 40% in the number of students, and 31% in the number of states offering blended education opportunities. Students to teacher ratios are a concern. While the average student-teacher ratio in the nation's public schools was 16 students per teacher, virtual schools reported more than twice as many students per teacher, 34. The average in blended schools was only very slightly lower, 33. The highest student-teacher ratio was in virtual schools operated by for-profit education management organizations, or EMOs, 44, while the lowest was in those operated by virtual school nonprofit EMOs of 19.5. On-time graduation rates. This is the percent of students who graduate within 4 years of starting the 9th grade. The on-time graduation rates for full-time blended and virtual schools have been rated poor by the NEPC at 43.4% and 43.1% respectively, which is almost half the national average of 82.3%. The on-time graduation rates for virtual schools have flattened or declined over the past few years, while the graduation rates for the nation have been improving about 1 percentage point each year. These findings align with other measures of school performance and contribute to the overall picture of virtual and blended school performance. Academic performance measured the percent of schools whose average academic performance was at an acceptable level of academic competency. As we look at the data, we must remember that blended schools tended to be in urban areas with lower income students versus virtual schools' demographics being closer to the state averages. This is a typical good news, bad news scenario, with mostly bad news. Virtual schools continue to underperform academically, including in comparison to blended schools. The bright spot is the nonprofit blended schools and for-profit blended schools. Overall, blended schools scored nearly twice the virtual schools' rate of acceptable academic performance. Teaching online requires different methods and skills not taught in normal teacher education programs. One of the problems with online education is the lack of teachers trained in this instruction model. Each of the 50 states does its own teacher certification in America. The national government has no control over this, which complicates the process of implementing educational policies across the nation. Less than 40% of surveyed online teachers report having had any professional development or training. In 2012, only 10 universities offered online certifications or online teaching courses. By 2016, 37 universities offered courses in online education. 9 states also require certification, although 2 of those states did not even offer the program in their state universities. Problems: underperformance, high student-to-teacher ratios, slow completion time rates, high growth rate, lack of certification requirements, lack of educational institutions with programs to grant those certification requirements. Now, what are the consequences of poor quality education? First of all, we have the lack of 21st century skills. Graduates will be unable to compete in the job market. Next, we have a lack of opportunities. Work, education, training, and advancement opportunities will not be as good for students who do not have the proper skills. And last, we have lack of adequate income. We have a higher rate of poverty, greater dependence on social services, poorer health, which all lead to a greater cost to the taxpayer and society. All of these lead to a lower quality of life. From the research, it appears that both models have their problems. The 40% growth in blended learning enrollment seems to be deserved, though, especially among the nonprofit schools due to their 100% academic performance achievement. However, guidance needs to be taken with virtual schools to ensure quality is improved so that the students can be ensured of equal access to a higher quality of life. Let's look at some of the recommendations. The National Education Policy Center recommends stop or slow the growth of virtual schools until reasons for poor performance are researched and corrected. Regulate the sizes of the schools and the classes to increase the quality of instruction and interaction. Sanctions should be levied against schools which consistently underperform. Study, emulate, and implement successful nonprofit methods used in blended learning. teacher training certification for online teachers. And lastly, more university programs for online certification. Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. This is a quote from the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. The past can give American education direction for the future, but we mustn't focus only there. As we look at virtual schools and blended classrooms, let's examine and build on the lessons learned from both their successes and failures in order to provide a better future for America's children. They shouldn't miss out on possible future benefits because we don't act now. Thank you for joining us.